Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watchbox, and thanks for logging on. As ever, all you see here is for sale. For pricing questions or any questions, reach out to me directly, tmosso at thewatchbox.com, to get the ball moving. We are always looking to build inventory, and we are buying one watch or an entire collection. No upper limit on value paid. Reach out to me, again, if you want to sell a watch, at tmosso at thewatchbox.com. Names, references, and when available, prices for these pieces are in the description below. Let's jump straight in. It is my absolute pleasure to present the watches on display today. They are among the finest as a group I have ever shared. Let's start with this watch. From only 1 year ago, 100 pieces, 39 millimeters in red gold. It is the H. Moser & C Venturer Concept Arctic Blue. This is my favorite Moser Fume dial. It is bright. It is almost iridescent. This is as close as you can get to a Rolex Milgauss Z Blue without actually marching straight up to the Pont Hans Wilsdorf. This is incredible stuff. 39 millimeters, 39, and as you can see, quite slender. It is a minimalist watch. We will throw it on my wrist, which is 16 centimeters in circumference. You can see Moser's famous kudu, minimally tanned strap, and it is very wearable. Lustrous, glittering, gleaming, simple, striking, and yet in spite of the purity of its dial, this is a watch that is unmistakably Moser, a company out of Schaffhausen, Switzerland, that is increasingly being described as the German-Swiss FP Journe. They make only 1,500 watches a year, of which this right here is part of a series of 100. So only 100 of these in existence. As you can see, the movement on this watch is handsome, broad, and entirely executed in-house. First, take note, movement sized to the case, the sign of a true manufacturer. There is a power reserve indicator hidden on the reverse side, a 3-day manual wind power reserve, and for toughness, a full balance bridge with a free sprung index, just like you'll find, for example, on a Rolex or Omega. Pull the crown out, it does have hacking seconds, and Moser is building all the small parts, including the hairspring, which is an overcoil, the balance, and the escapement. They're doing all of this proprietary. You can see the bridges have double-crested Côte de Genève, quite beautiful, satination of the wheels, and then there's a lovely bevel on the edge of the bridges. This is mechanically applied, but the watch is a combination of mechanical and hand finish, much like FP Journe or Audemars Piguet. Now, taking one last look at that dial, it is absolutely bewitching and by itself worth the price of admission. Again, all of this in red gold. Now, if you prefer a blue independent horology proposition, but your budget is more ambitious, then I have for you the one of 18-piece limited edition Greubel Forsey Balancier S, launched last year as Greubel Forsey's full no-holds-barred sports watch. Their first. This is a timepiece that wears easily, 43 millimeters in grade 5 titanium. Throw it on the wrist and you can see this 100-meter water-resistant sports watch is a perfect match for my smallish wrist. Take a quick look at it in profile. It's cambered so it arcs around the wrist. There's also a wonderful camber to the sapphire front and back, and you can really see how the watch sort of rolls over from side to side. When viewed from the top, you can see that the watch is only about 45 millimeters lug to lug, which means it doesn't come anywhere near the edges of my wrist. If your wrist is as small as 14 centimeters circumference, you're going to wear this one well. You can see there are polymer inserts on the flank, full integrated strap that has a little bit of the relieved hollows of the case molded into it. The timepiece features a full grade 5 titanium deployant clasp, twin trigger release. You can see this one is quite secure. They even include their micro graphics inside the trigger release. The attention to detail is outstanding. Now, as you can see, this is grade 5 titanium, which means it's light the way titanium is, lighter than steel, but it's also more scratch resistant than steel. On the dial side, lots to love. The bridges are chemically blued and crafted from titanium. That is, the bridges and plates of this movement are entirely grade 5 titanium. There's a power reserve indicator, twin stacked barrels, giving the watch a 3-day power reserve manual wind. The bridge for the balance is immaculately beveled on its side and then media blasted on its interior. It's free sprung for shock resistance and precise regulation. You can see a 13 millimeter variable inertia proprietary balance built by Greubel Forsey. Also note that it features a handmade overcoil to allow it to keep outstanding time in any orientation. Turn it all over, things get even more impressive. You can see that the bridges have that same bluing effect with their edges raised and black polished with mirrored chamfers on their side. You can also see there are sharp inward angles where two bevels meet here, here, and here. And you'll also appreciate that with 4 interior angles on the reverse side, Greubel Forsey is not holding back. back, you see golden chaton holding the pivot jewels, a nod to the pocket watch era. And if you're wondering what all the text on the watch means, it is en français, the philosophy of Greubel Forsey, traditional, fine finish, and the highest level of technical innovation. A truly special watch, and again, something distinctly different, and with only 100 Greubel Forsey watches made per year, very rare. Okay, the poster child, or I should say the thumbnail child. This is the watch I promised you just a moment ago when you clicked. The timepiece launched in 2016 at Basel World, and I was there. This was one of the most memorable launches for Rolex in 2016, and it is the Air King. Discontinued several years prior, and previously a 34mm watch, the Air King took on an all-new identity in 2016, sharing a case and a magnetically shielded movement internally with the Milgauss. The difference between the two watches is aesthetic. As you can see, the dial on the Air King is inspired by the Bloodhound supersonic car project for which Rolex designed the interior gauges. So you have that combination of Arabic numerals every 5 minutes and the shocks of yellow, green, and white on a black base. And of course, it is an Explorer dial with tri-Arabic numerals. Throw it on the wrist, 40mm. It is considerably larger than previous Air Kings. But you can see that, like the Milgauss, it also wears fairly thin at just over 13mm thick. And uniquely among Rolex watches with solid end links, the lug-to-lug distance is actually the distance across the wrist. It's about 49mm. The lugs don't actually... They actually don't give up anything to the end links. You can see the end links are no longer than the lugs. It's 100 meters water resistant, 48-hour power reserve, and of course it is a COSC certified Swiss chronometer. Some differences between this and the Milgauss. You can see the Milgauss features polished center links. The Milgauss also features a raised and relieved crown stamped, but you can see there is the 5mm Easy Link system here, and of course it is a good looking watch from every angle, beautifully balanced, a no-date dial with the absence of the Cyclops eye. That said, many do enjoy the Cyclops Eye magnifier, as it is practical and in the presence of a date, useful. This timepiece many will regard as their favorite Rolex watch. In an era when the Sub, the GMT, and the Daytona are red hot, it is the steel and platinum Yacht Master that often is highlighted by Rolex fans, the dyed-in-the-wool kind, not the fashionista kind, but the long-term Rolex fans love the Yacht Master. Now, there is a lot to love right here. You have a metallic blue sunburst dial with a few shocks of red, large indices in white gold, hands also in white gold. The watch, of course, 100 meters water resistant. You can see that this is not the super case that you find on the GMTs and the Submariners, and I can show you that because I have a GMT right here. You can really see this case almost has more in common with the Daytona in its profile. It's lovely, fluid, fine, and tapers to a graceful point. The timepiece features a full platinum bidirectional rotating Yachtsman's bezel, which means it can be used for timing, but bidirectional rotating it is not a dive bezel. Nevertheless, you can still easily use it for a 0 to 60-minute count-up timer. Note the bezel is both media blasted internally and then polished on its raised and relieved numerals. Mechanically identical to the Air King you just saw, it features a somewhat more deluxe clasp that's externally polished, and as you can see has a double lock rather than just the lift lock. It has the clamshell and the lift lock, plus it has the 5mm Easy Link. Throw it on the wrist, and these are wonderfully slim, slender, and grateful. A handsome, comfortable, and fun all-arounder. This is your sports watch. This is your dress watch. This is your all-around watch. And, of course, this could also be your grail watch, as many regard these platinum bezel Yacht Masters as some of the finest and best balanced aesthetically in the Rolex collection in the 21st century. Let's do a quick loom shot here because this is a well-loomed watch. And we're back with the Yacht Master. You can see Rolex proprietary chromolite bloom and plenty of it. That blue loom is distinctive of Rolex, and of course you can see all three hands loomed, a feature I believe every loomed watch should include. Now, jumping to the star of 2019, of course, this is the GMT Master II. This is the 126710 BLNR. It is the second generation black and blue. Of course, the first was launched at Basel 2013. Big differences here. Well, you've got a Jubilee bracelet, which was long offered as an option on the GMT from 1954 right up till about 2008 and then discontinued. The previous generation did not include that as an option on the steel model. Here it comes back, and it's combined with a new new 70-hour power reserve 3285 movement. You can see it's got the same type of clasp as the Yacht Master we just saw, and it has the same kind of easy link, tool-free adjustment built in. What is different here is that the bracelet itself has small cross-section individual links. This is the Jubilee, a bracelet that was born in 1945 on the original date, just the 40th anniversary of Rolex. It was the Jubilee, hence the name of the bracelet. These days, with all solid links, it's solid enough to be a sports bracelet, and it vents better than the Oyster. So while the look may be a bit more refined and genteel, nevertheless, this is very much a sports watch. And though it's a pilot's watch, it's 100 meters water resistant. It's still a chronometer. Rolex gets the COSC certificate, and then it doubles up by casing the certified movement and testing the watch so that it runs no worse than +2, -2 seconds per day. Hence the terminology superlative chronometer on the dial. On this generation of Rolex, it finally means something. Now you've got two different time zones settable independently. One is in a 24-hour format, one is in a 12-hour format. Hacking seconds, as you see, so you can set the watch to the second against a reference time. Ceramic bezel insert for scratch resistance. And of course, if you set that 24-hour hand to Greenwich Mean Time, you can use the bezel and your local port or airport GMT offset to find temporarily 3 time zones on this watch. Now, I always like to offer something that's priced reasonably and yet just as much fun as the high-lux watches. And that's what we have right here with this Hanhart Pioneer Racemaster GTM, 45 millimeters in steel. It is a racing-inspired monopusher chronograph that takes a basic Valjoux 7753 base and adds a La Joux monopusher chronograph complication. So as you can see, being a monopusher, it's got a lovely nostalgic look to it. And like a lot of race themed watches of the 60s, it has a handsome array of colors on the dial, including black, silver, red, and blue. Also, for a watch that's value priced, you can see it features applique indices, which I happen to love, and you can see they're alternately satined and polished on their sides, satinated on their tops. The watch is easy to wear in spite of its size. It's a 45, so I wouldn't wear it on a wrist smaller than mine. I'd say 16 centimeters circumference and up, and that's good because a lot of vintage motorsports-inspired watches are petite today. So if you've got that big wrist and you want the vintage look, this is a great way to do it. Automatic winding, 42-hour power reserve, a really well-tuned cam-based chronograph system, super sharp to the touch. It's also 100 meters water resistant. You wouldn't expect that necessarily on a motorsports-inspired watch. Put this on a water-resistant strap. It is swimmable. You can see it has a vintage-inspired perforated leather strap, and then it's got a lovely combination of polish and satin, and on the reverse side, the checkered flag, reminding you that this watch is very much for the gearhead in your life. Not just watches, but cars. Let's shift gears from Germany back to Les Bras-Sous, Vallée de Joux, Switzerland, and we're going back to 2010, the 500-piece black steel Audemars Piguet Millenary Quincy Jones. Dedicated to Quincy Jones, you can see it features a piano key motif on the dial, all blacked out. Note the attention to detail as there's both satin and polished DLC steel. Now this is, of course, diamond-like carbon. It is applied by physical vapor deposition, or PVD, but all PVD is not created equal. The material itself is independent from the technique, so you feature PVD of very soft compounds, and then PVD of diamond-like carbon, which you can see is an effective anti-scratch agent. Now the dial is lovely oblong, and if you look, there are broad and thin applique Roman numerals with a watchmaker's 4. The watch is only 10.1 millimeters thick. Inside, you can see the signature of Quincy Jones on the reverse side, as well as individual numbering. Inside, you have the same movement you'll find on, for example, a 15400. It's the 3120 automatic movement, quick set date, hacking seconds, 60-hour power reserve, and a very tough sports watch architecture. It's 47 millimeters wide by 49 millimeters lug to lug, but being broad, flat, and thin, you can see it wears easily on my wrist. The Millenary has always been an ergonomic dream from its first generation in 1995 to the present. It's a handsome and easy to wear broad timepiece that has a large saucer-like profile, and the Quincy Jones is probably the most beautiful, with the possible exception of a rivalry from the 4101 open dial balance. This is a truly special piece from AP, and to its credit, it's not just another Royal Oak. That said, neither is this. This one's an Offshore. Launched in 2011, this is the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak Offshore Tourbillon chronograph. The features runneth over. red gold case, or perhaps I should say rose gold, as it is 4, not 5N. And you can see 44 millimeters. It features evacuations, polished bevels, satination, and as you can appreciate, inboard of the lugs, there's actually media blasting. So a triple finished case. You can see they have a forged carbon and autoclave cured bezel with stainless steel bolts, and then a dial that is open, showing you the twin mainspring barrels. Let me grab my polishing cloth here. And I'm back and able to denude this watch of offending fingerprints. Truly special here. You've got an Audemars Piguet Renoir Papi caliber 2912, immaculately hand-finished, twin mainspring barrels, almost 10 days of manual wind power reserve. That's 237 hours here. You'll note that it is loomed. There will be a loom shot, and you can see, and we're going to move those hands because they offend my sensibility, blocking the tourbillon. There is a dial side 1-minute tourbillon that is free-sprung, employs an overcoil handmade hairspring, is entirely black polished, and beats away at 21.6. Now let's do a quick loom shot, and then we'll come back and take a look at the reverse side. As you can see, this is an Offshore, a real sports watch. Absolutely no issues with loom. There's plenty of it. It's big, it's bright, easily discerned at night. Now, taking a look at the reverse side, let's take a quick look at the profile. You can see this is what you're paying for when you buy a Royal Oak, that hand finishing of the metal. Ceramic crown shoulder, ceramic pusher shoulders for scratch resistance, and then turn it all over and you can see that the movement is by APRP. You can see right there, ARP2912. So not only are you getting an entirely hand-finished movement, which you don't get on basic Audemars Piguet watches, but you're getting a truly high-mech watch. In addition to the tourbillon and the near 10-day power reserve, you have a column wheel lateral clutch chrono, and you can see everything has been silvered. Rhodium on the bridges and plates, and then the chronograph components are satinated and beveled in stainless steel, with a very crisp column wheel feel, and of course a high horology, a 5-position adjustment. Truly imposing. It is too big for my wrist. I'm going to let you know that this watch wears almost like a 50 millimeter watch on your wrist. I would say 17 centimeter circumference wrist or larger, but what a timepiece. The definition of a grail watch, and for most, the ultimate aspirational object of your Audemars Piguet affections, and possibly even an exit watch, the last watch you'll ever need. Tourbillon, 10-day power reserve, and a chronograph, all of it handmade inside and out. Let's talk about two of a kind. Well, almost, not quite. Romain Gaultier, also of the Vallée du Jeu, local to Audemars Piguet, Breguet, and Jaeger-LeCoultre, among others, but Romain Gaultier is most often compared to a different denizen of the Vallée, and that is, of course, Philippe Dufour, and the comparison is down to finish. Romain Gaultier and Philippe Dufour absolutely gilds the lily to the point of pain. That is how gorgeous and minuscule the finishing details here are on the Logical 1. First launched in 2013 and immediately GPHG recognized, the Logical 1 reimagines the classic fusée and chain constant force device, and here, both 43 millimeters, you can have it in titanium or white gold. Let's talk about the fly tie first and then make our way over to the white gold. Here you can see that the watch includes a good deal of attention to detail. First, there's the case, which is polished, media blasted, and satinated. All three. You can see the case flanks are sculpted. Nothing here is default. These cases are not stamped, or I should say, they are not stamped and then mechanically finished. They are machined and then mechanically finished. That's how you get this degree of detail. Now, to wind the watch in its 46-hour power reserve, there is a pusher actuator that actually winds a chain, and the chain itself features black polished links and then jewels internally. You can see the little violet pivot jewels inside, but it winds from the barrel side to the fusée side. And the fusée here is a snail cam. And the point of that is that it prevents the snaking and the climbing that you get with a conventional spiral fusée, always keeping the snail cam in the same plane as the wheel that the barrel uses to draw the chain, so you don't get that additional friction that's created by changing the plane of the chain. You've just got the flat plane between these two pivot points, and then if you look at the bridge between them, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 interior angles where two bevels meet at a sharp cleft break. Full black polish across the bridge itself, and you can see the same rendered on the wheel that sits atop the barrel. The Dial here, Grand Faux enamel in blue, fired up to 20 times at up to 800 degrees centigrade. This is a craft art in its own right. Now, Romain Gaultier makes all of its small parts, including its balances and its wheels, and in fact, it does have Chanel fractional ownership, and it provides both engineering and component fabrication for the haute de gamme Chanel watches. Here you can see that the wheel, the balance, that is, beats away at 28.8, no compromise in beat rate. There's another set of interior angles and black polished surfaces with satination on the outer balance cock. Of course, it is free sprung for durability, and on the reverse side, you can see we have an open barrel. The company makes its own artistically crafted screws that allow greater torque to be applied without stripping out the slots. You can also see there is a power reserve indicator, many more bezels and interior angles on the reverse side. We'll throw this titanium watch, which is relatively avant-garde by the standards of the Valet de Joux, but we'll throw it on my wrist, and you can see it's a perfect fit. I could recommend it for a wrist as small as 14.5 centimeters circumference. Now let's take a look at the Logical 1. This is from, of course, the more traditional sensibility, and Romain Gaultier ascribes to both, but it's a white gold case, and you can see the same standard of finish, but it is a warmer tone than polished titanium. You can also see that the bridges and plates of the movement have been gilded, giving them a lovely pocket watch evocative form with a combination of satination, polish, and media blasting. Still a Grand Faux enamel here, black dial, and you've got that same fusee and chain structure, and you can see it's wound the same way using the pusher. It's novel, but it's also a lot of fun. Now this one in white gold is heftier in the hand, but also, in my opinion, more attractive, as it's easier to see the mile-wide bevels as well as the sharp break between the interior angle surfaces. This is really, in my opinion, the one you want if you love fine finish. The bevels are as broad and mirrored as Philippe Dufour's. He would be proud. I suspect they finish these bevels with the same gentian wood that the master himself employs, and you can see just how handsome the finish is, leading to Greubel Forsey, Philippe Dufour, and Fernand Berthoud comparisons. It truly is that good. These are rare watches, as Gaultier only builds about 100 to 200 watches each year, and the Logical 1 remains the flagship as well as the defining model. A truly special watch, and if you love independent horology, this is a great way to get into it. No compromise finish, technical innovation, wearable ergonomics, craft beauty, and big corporate money behind the company to ensure it's always around to service and provide parts. Of course, if you want total peace of mind, Omega truly will always be around to provide parts and service. Let's take a look here. Right here, 2016, this is the CK2998, based on the same case shape as 2012's CK2998 inspired first Omega in space. Of course, it pays tribute to the first Omega in space, which was worn as a private watch during early days of NASA space exploration. It was not issued, it was chosen by astronauts themselves. Now here you can see the watch is a little bit unconventional, as they didn't want it to be a true vintage homage, but rather a nod and a wink, a modern watch with historical details. And indeed, it is that. 39.7 millimeters. You can see it doesn't have the crown guard structure that you find on later moon watches, and here you can see what that looks like for good effect. It is a smaller case, 39.7 rather than 42. The lugs are squared off, meaning it's shorter across the wrist. It's only 47 millimeters, and then it's minimally beveled. The dial, of course, recalls the CK2998, which featured, among other things, Applique Omega logo and Alpha style hands for the registers. Now, there is a ceramic tachymeter here, so it's a ceramic insert. The crystal itself is sapphire, and then internally it has a Omega Moonwatch caliber 1861 cam lateral clutch, 21.6 beat rate, Lemanya based, and a 48-hour manual wind power reserve. Now, we'll throw this one on the wrist real quick and then do a loom shot. The watch is incredibly handsome and incredibly wearable. If you've tried the Moonwatch and it wasn't to your liking, either because the style didn't exactly inspire or was just too large, this is a great way to give it a second chance. It's a different look, it's got its own character, and it's much more wearable. As a smaller watch, I can recommend it for a 13.5 centimeter circumference wrist. Let's do a loom shot here because it's worth it. Now here you can see a very special watch. First of all, not only is it brightly loomed, but so is the entire of the tachymeter. So the entirety of the tachymeter is loomed, and there's a lovely lollipop loomed bob on the Chronograph seconds hand, so you get an awful lot of mileage out of a relatively compact watch body. So this is a real special watch. Looks great, feels great, unusual, and has a lot of personality, which I consider to be essential in a vintage-inspired watches, because I don't like straight-up reissues. I like watches that leave a legacy of some kind, that can be tomorrow's classic, not just a shadow of yesterday's. All right, now let's take a look at a watch that came out in 2017. This is the Apollo 17 45th anniversary watch, a tribute to Gene Cernan. Of course, Gene Cernan was on that three-man mission, which was the last one to visit the moon. It took off in 1972, returned, as you can see, leaving the moon at 5:34 Greenwich Mean Time. That's on the dial itself. A lot to love about this 272-piece limited edition. It's 42 millimeters. It's a classic Moonwatch case, but there's a lot going on here. Start with the fact that the dial is ceramic, blue ceramic. Outboard, we have the staggered checker pattern that's typically associated with the racing dial Omega Speedmaster. So you've got a racing dial and you've got a ceramic dial, but you've also got applique gold indices, gold hands, and gold components applied to the dial with the image of the god Apollo, and of course you could see the moon. If you look carefully, you can also see there is a numeral 17 on that register, and that is your constant seconds register. You'll also appreciate the fact that the 45th anniversary watch has a tachymeter base 45 rather than 400 or 500, and there's more. As you turn it over, and you can see an immense white gold medallion featuring the mission logo. It is white gold, and then it features gilded yellow gold. So you see a combination of two golds superimposed on one white gold medallion, and it is an individually numbered 272-piece limited edition. I would say of all the colored gold Omega watches, this is easily the one that draws the most interest and tends to sell the fastest when I show it on the channel. It's got a full gold clasp to match. It's one of the few occasions you'll see a juxtaposition of blue and yellow gold, and it's just a beastly combination with so much visual power, charisma. It's almost hypnotic. It's truly bewitching, beguiling, and mesmerizing. It's easy to fall in love with this look, and you don't need a huge wrist, as I'm proving right now. Now, internally, it's identical to the CK2998 that you just saw. This is a watch that is Moonwatch powered, so it uses that movement that is still used on NASA space flights. Gene Cernan would have used the 861. This right here is the, or he might have used a 321 to be fair. He would have used a 321 or an 861. This here is the 1861, and a very good looking watch. We'll do a quick loom shot. It's not as elaborate as the 2998, but as you can see, it is still a sports watch with all three hands loomed. Okay, two from Patek Philippe, both in white gold. Let's start with the veteran. This, of course, is part of a series made from 1986 to 2004. It's the 3970, and this is the 3970G. This one's unique in that it features, well, at least in English-speaking markets, it's unusual, in that it features a German language calendar, though, of course, French is the lingua franca of Patek Philippe. Remember that most Swiss speak German. Now, the watch is 36.2 millimeters in diameter, and as you can see, it is in very, very good shape. This is a third series dial, and as you can see, it features an upgrade that was included on some late models, a full deployant clasp rather than the pin buckle commonly seen on these. Note the fluting of the lugs. Here, you can see that little, if ever, refinished. This timepiece is remarkably intact. You always look for two things with these. You look for the depth of the fluting on the lugs themselves, and you can see this one has plenty of depth, and then you look at the sharpness of the edge of the bezel, and this one has excellent definition in both regards. Now, of course, it is a perpetual calendar chronograph. Handsome looking watch. About 4,000 versions of all 3970s were made, 4,000 examples, and they were split up into basically 3.5 primary series, and this is the third series watch with pointed baton hands and then dart style indices. A perpetual calendar chronograph. It features both a column wheel lateral clutch chronograph and a perpetual calendar, so it can deal with irregular length months and leap years. And as you see on the reverse side, like the Moonwatches, this is Lemanya based, but whereas the Moonwatches we saw earlier are based on the Lemanya 1873, this is based on the Lemanya 2310, which was the basis for the 321 caliber that truly did go to the moon. Column wheel, lateral clutch, but highly modified in Patek Philippe form. It takes the 45-48 hour power reserve of the Lemanya and upgrades it to 65. It takes the flat hairspring and upgrades it to a Breguet overcoil. It takes the mobile stud index and upgrades it to a Gyromax free-sprung architecture. And of course, all of these 3970s were made between 86 and 2004, so they all feature the Poinçon de Genève rather than the later Patek Philippe seal. And you can see the Geneva seal on the balance cock just beneath my finger. The finishing is world-class. Let me do my best to show you. Here you can see on the edge of the bridges, as well as the jewel and the screw sinks, as well as the steel chronograph components, there's mirrored anglage, perfectly aligned Côte de Genève stripes across the bridges, engine turning on the base plate, black polished screws with chamfered slots and circumference, and then satination on the top of all the chronograph components, as well as across all of the wheels. It beats away at a pocket watch style, 18,000 vibrations per hour, and it is very wearable. I'd say if your wrist is smaller or you have a taste for discretion, this is going to be your traditional choice. It's a unisex option. It's usable on a wrist as small as, well, heck, I'm not going to give you a lower limit because it's so compact at about 43 millimeters lug to lug that I can recommend it for any wrist. You'll quickly learn German and learn to love the unconventional calendar. And if, of course, you speak German, this is going to be right up your alley. Remember, after all, German is very Swiss, and this watch is a lovely way to get started on your second language. Let's take a quick look at the other Patek, because that one has even more going on, but it's outside the case rather than inside. Now, this is a model launched in 2016. It's the Patek Philippe 5160 500G, based on 2013's 5160 itself, based on the 5159. It's a 38 millimeter white gold watch, but fully engraved. The officer's case, evocative of early 20th century pocket watches that would have had lugs welded on, straps fixed by screws and bars, converted from pocket watches for the use of officers in the trenches in World War I, the idea being you needed both hands for combat, and your military apparel may not have pockets, so you needed to be able to fix the watch to your wrist. So this has the look of a pocket watch converted to a wristwatch, albeit with a much higher standard of finish. There is hand-engraved banknote scrolling on every surface. You can see it on the crown, you can see it on the bezel, you can see it on the case flank, you can even see it on the screw heads themselves, the case back, and on the dial side. The dial has also been freehand engraved, so no two of these are exactly alike. The artisans who do this do only this, and they do it all day. They engrave the case with a burin, which is manual engraving. There are no drill bits, no lathes used here. Everything is eye-hand coordination. On the dial, very special, black and white gold applique Breguet numerals. It is an aperture-style perpetual calendar. You've got your day, retrograde date, your month, and then your leap year phase indicator, a moon phase, and then lovely apple or palm-style hands at center, also black and white gold. And because the old officers' watches were converted from pocket watches in general, they often featured onion crowns and hunter or hinged casebacks, and that's exactly what we have here. You can also see that the frame of the caliber 324 right here is all engraved. The movement, free sprung, silicone hairspring, 45-hour power reserve, perpetual calendar. Of course, with a perpetual calendar, you don't have to worry about leap years, you don't have to worry about irregular length months. The watch takes care of that for you. And because everything here has received the artisanal treatment, you have even an engraved buckle. Let's throw this one on the wrist real quick. Although it looks large at 38 millimeters, it is not a huge piece. It's bigger than the 3970, but not much larger. Super wearable, compact, and suitable for a wrist as small as 13.5 centimeters circumference. Very special, an artisanal piece, and from Patek Philippe, a piece that requires approval from the Sterns to purchase. So very special and very exclusive. I'm playing favorites today, guys, and I saved the best for last. If I had to pick just one watch, for once, it would be the big piece. Today, we're discussing a breakthrough, a landmark, a watershed for all of high horology, the original 2004 Greubel Forsey Tourbillon double tourbillon. The double tourbillon featuring a 4-minute tourbillon as well as a 1-minute tourbillon was a landmark, combining two coaxial tourbillon, a 30-degree inclined balance, and levels of finish never before seen. Independent watchmaking took a quantum leap forward with this watch, the product of Frenchman and designer Robert Grooble, an Englishman and engineer and watchmaker, Stephen Forsey. This 43.5mm white gold timepiece represents the haute de gamme and the ne plus ultra of not just fine finish, but design ambition. This is a surprisingly wearable watch. At 43.5mm, I can wear it well. You can see in white gold, it established the design language for Greubel Forsey, not just the big open dials and the bombastic three-dimensional depth views of the movements, but also the concave profile of the mirror-like lugs, the broad sculpted case flanks. Here, it's a fascinating undulation that's designed to reference the frequency of the balance. I consider it to be a little bit of condiment spread on a hot dog, but then again, we've got to be able to laugh about high horology too. Taking a look at the dial, absolutely nothing held back. Twin mainspring barrels, fast barrels, rotating once every 3.2 hours, giving the watch a 72-hour power reserve in spite of the power-intensive complication. Let's get a little bit closer to the light and see if I can't get you a better view of those two tourbillons. As you can see, there are 4 spiral fired blue steel spokes that come off the 4-minute tourbillon, and they are coaxial, so one is turning inside the other. And you can see that the tourbillon carriage, over 15 millimeters in diameter, acts as the base on which those two tourbillons pivot. Now you can see this scroll that traces 60 seconds. This is actually the outer 4-minute tourbillon. And then inboard you have the 1-minute tourbillon. Note that the bridge for the tourbillon carriage is entirely rounded and specular finished or black polished. The same has been lavished on the inner tourbillon carriage. It is also completely rounded. Every screw features a chamfered slot in circumference and a black polished head. You can see there's a lovely ruthenium coating on the dial. The 72-hour power reserve featuring an engraved and lacquered white gold scale. And of course, though the watch does feature a 1-minute tourbillon, it also features a separate seconds indicator. White gold individual indices as well as numerals. You can see that there are dial side bolts, a little nod to the influence of F.P. Journe at the time. The presence of the blued bolts on the dial side is something that would not be universal on Greubel Forsey, but it's interesting for those who chart the changes. This is the look of early Greubel styling, and by that I mean Robert Greubel, who has always handled the style of the watches. In their early days, coming over from, among others, experience with Audemars, Piguet, Renoir, Papy, they wanted to pay tribute to Valet de Jeu pocket watches and the tradition of Greubel Forsey's own home in La Chaux-de-Fonds. So from the Valet de Jeu to La Chaux-de-Fonds, we have the sort of watch valley of traditional Swiss watch construction, and that pocket watch era is paid tribute on the reverse side, where you can see the bridges are a lovely raw finish with a frosted coat, mirrored bevels, satinated wheels. You can see the stacked mainspring barrels, and I should mention that the stacked mainspring barrels are beautifully finished in their own right. You'll also note, if you look at the individual teeth, they have been beveled inboard, and the wheels, if you take a look at the wheels, they feature bevels on their spokes as well as their inner circumference. Nothing has been held back, and you can see that the pivot jewel for the lower staff of the tourbillon is held in place by a screw-fixed chaton. Look at the size of the fired blue screws. Look at the size of the mirrored anglage. Look at the satination on the base plate. Absolutely everything has been festooned with the finest finish. There's a reason why then as now, Greubel Forsey has roughly one person working for every watch completed, and that is because the sheer amount of energy required to create a Greubel Forsey watch. Landmarks in finish, innovation, design, and chronometry. Greubel Forsey must be considered among the most important independents in the world today, and this was the very first Greubel Forsey watch. Reach out again to tmosso at thewatchbox.com. It's in the description below for purchase and pricing details of this or any watch you see on any Watchbox platform. Time out, Tim out, Greubel and Forsey out, and thanks for logging on.